Hi everyone. My part of the presentation is to talk about the learning pyramid and teaching materials. My name is Matthew Johnston and I am an ESL and outreach catalyst with Forefront experience, but I also have the joy of volunteering with Literacy Connexus as one of their text trainer apprentices. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the learning pyramid. Think about how much information you retain from these different modes of learning. And then on the right side, you'll see some different percentages. These are the different retention rates. So let me give you the first one as an example. So if you just hear a lecture, the average rate of retention of information and recall and remembering what you heard from that lecture is 5%. If all you're doing is hearing what someone else says in a lecture format. I'm going to give you a minute to try to answer the rest of these. So try to match and think about audiovisual, teaching others, practice by doing, reading, demonstration, discussion groups. How much retention for each of those modes of learning? Okay, so let's look at the answers. And this comes from the National Training Laboratories in Bethel, Maine. So they did the research on this. And we already said lecture is 5%. Reading is the next one, 10%. So on average, if you just read something one time through, you can retain and remember and be able to answer questions for about 10% of the material. If you add some visual to a lecture, if you add some media, or if you watch a video, that can lead to 20% retention. And demonstrations, where the teacher is showing and practicing by doing, and all the students are watching the teacher do something, that's 30% retention. Then a discussion group can lead to 50% retention. So students interacting with each other, talking about the topic, giving their feedback and their ideas, that leads to 50% retention. 75% practice by doing. So if the students are getting hands-on and they are practicing the lesson, they are practicing the skill that is trying to be learned, and they're doing that probably in groups or in the classroom working together, hands-on, 75% retention. And then finally, teaching others leads to 90% retention. And of course, you can't have your ESL students just teach each other all the time. But you might think about how maybe at the end of a lesson, you can even give them some scaffold, give them a few sentences or some ideas about how to communicate what you just learned. And then you can get them into pairs and they can teach each other. They can repeat and recall what they've learned in that lesson. And that can really solidify the learning. But in general, think about how you can use all of these different modes in your classroom. I want to tell a little story to kind of illustrate this. And as I do, think about some skill that you're an expert in. Think about some skills where your students are experts. And I'm going to tell a story about a skill where my wife is an expert. She is an expert baker, and she developed this skill over many years. She grew up watching her mom bake and watching her grandma bake. And then when we got married, we moved to China. And to have any baked goods that were familiar to us, she had to bake it. So she read books, she watched YouTube videos, and then she practiced baking. And this really developed her skill. Well, then we came back to the US, and my wife enrolled in a baking certificate course, and she's taking classes, she's practicing by doing, and she's also teaching some of our friends, some of our neighbors. Some of my ESL students have come over and learned how to bake, like this apple pie. They worked together, they practiced by doing, and my wife taught how to do this bake. So through that process, she has become an expert baker. And that example is kind of, over many years, she's become an expert. And you can think about that for your ESL students. Over many years, they're going to be exposed to different modes of learning, and they will become, hopefully, more and more experts in the English language. But also think about their specific lessons and think about how you can use these different modes, from audiovisual to demonstration to discussion, working in groups, and practicing by doing. How can you get the students to work hands-on? And then even challenge your students to be able to teach each other or recall, like what you just taught at the beginning of the lesson, you can have the students repeat and recall and teach each other what they've learned in that lesson. Another way to put it is from Shunji. He said something which translated means something like this: I hear and forget, I see and remember, I do and I understand. If you're only hearing something, you're probably going to forget a lot of what you hear. If you hear and see, it helps you remember. You'll remember it more. If you do, so if you practice by doing or hands-on kind of practice, you can understand, you can remember, you can understand, you have a greater retention and knowledge about that topic. So think about this as you're entering the ESL classroom. Another way to put it is to think about these different intelligences. And you've probably seen this before in your studies or in your workplace even. There are this idea of different intelligences. Think about your own intelligences, your own kind of what you're strong at in these different types of intelligences. Then think about your students and maybe think about how you can utilize some of these different intelligences as you're teaching them. Okay, let's take a moment to reflect on these 3 questions. And you might even pause the video and get a piece of paper, write down your responses to these questions. Number 1, which mode of teaching do I use most? Which one is most comfortable for me? And is it best for my students? So my example is lecture. I tend towards lecture, and I know that that's not best for my students if I just lecture all the time. So now that I know that, I can kind of focus on number 2. Number 2, how can I include a mode of teaching that I rarely use? How can I include other modes of teaching? So think of even just one. And it's lecture, demonstration, reading, discussion, practice by doing, audio, visual, and teaching others. And I have a couple examples here. The first example, I could have my intermediate students teach the class how to cook one dish from their culture after we finish our session on food, so they could teach others. Another example, I could use total physical response, and that's practice by doing with my beginner class to practice basic verbs. Number 3, what's one way that I can include a multiple intelligence that I rarely use? So along the same lines, think about those multiple intelligences, and then think about how you can utilize one of them to maybe engage students who otherwise might not be as engaged as usual. So I think about music. I don't use music a lot in my classroom, so then I have to really, make an effort to put it in my lesson and engage students. And it's challenging at first. It seems a little awkward maybe at first, but it's been really good. My students love it. So I use jazz chants in my class, and it has a rhythm and a pattern. You can kind of clap along with the beat, and it has a rhyming scheme. So if you look up ESL jazz chants online, you can see some jazz chants and use those, try them out, or try some other method of using some different multiple intelligences. Okay, so now let's talk about teaching materials. And I'm guessing you're already using them in the classroom. I hope you are. But let's go through just a few of them. Let's start with real objects. These are some different types of teaching materials, and I kind of listed them kind of from best to worst, but all of these are good if you can use them in the classroom. If you can use real objects, I would say that's the best. If you can bring in real food, this is an apple, this is an orange. Hold it up to the students. They can really grasp, the meaning of that thing that you're showing. So you can do something like, this is a water bottle, and you can even manipulate, use some prepositions. Put the water bottle on the table, and there it is. It's down on the table. You can use, just things in your classroom, right? This is a pair of scissors. These are scissors. Now you're using this and these and practicing with scissors or pairs of other things. Here I have a mug. This is a mug. Put the water in the mug. Things like that. Put the pen in the mug. Now you're practicing using real objects. That's just from stuff I found around the office here. But you can bring in real food, you can bring in a real newspaper, and have students interact with those real objects, those things that are used in real life every day. Next, you could use simulated objects. And kids use this all the time as they're learning and growing. And students, adult learners, can use this as well. And it's kind of a good stand-in when you can't get the real thing. So you could use plastic food. You could use manipulatives that represent, or maybe are smaller versions. I have some little kind of they're like rubber or plastic toys, but they represent, their little animals and their little figures, and I use those in my class for creative writing for my advanced class. So you can use those simulated objects as well. Those are really helpful. Then, picture files, pictures of real objects. Hopefully, you already have this. You already have a set of pictures for each of your lessons. I like to have a big set so that the whole class can see. But then I also like to have smaller sets, kind of like playing card size sets, so that students can interact with them if they're in pairs or in groups, and they can talk about those, or move them around. Say, here I have a little picture of an apple or a bicycle or something, and they can have a conversation. Oh, do you have a bicycle? Yes, I have a bicycle, and you can see it on the little card. So here you have, this is a bicycle. And then if you have other pictures of the same thing, this is a bicycle. The man is riding the bicycle. He is riding fast. This is a bicycle. This is a black bicycle. Notice how I have multiple pictures of the same thing. If you can do that, it's really helpful. It's great. The students can not only know that one type of bicycle is a bicycle, or one color of bicycle is a bicycle, they can kind of see the whole group and understand that these are all bicycles, and do that with each object. That can be great. If you have to do that just on a computer or on a projector, that's okay. I love to have the physical thing, and have your picture files. Those are great. Maybe the next least best is drawings of real objects. They're still helpful. You can do it on the whiteboard, draw your own, or you can find some icons or things like that, especially when you're printing. If you have to print in black and white, those can, little clip arts can work well. Notice how they're clearly not as good as a picture of a real thing, or bringing in the real thing, especially when you see that black and white one on the bottom. If they say, this is a bicycle, it's a little hard to tell. That might be a tricycle. It could be a little kid's bike. It's hard to tell. There's no pedals on it, so you can't really identify it necessarily. So notice how there's some drawbacks to just drawings of real objects. And if I'm drawing stuff on the board, there's definitely drawbacks. I'm not that great at drawing, but it's better than nothing. And then maybe the least best, but sometimes we still have to use it. This isn't really a teaching material, but just talking about an idea or talking about a word. And notice how challenging that is. So if we're just still talking about bicycles, think about if you had to describe a bicycle to someone without using a picture, without drawing it, without acting out the motion of a bicycle. You just have to say something like, a bicycle is a form of transportation that has two wheels. A person can ride on a bicycle and make it move by pedaling. And maybe your students know what transportation means, and wheels and all those things, and pedaling, but maybe not. So notice how challenging it is without the teaching materials to try to get across an idea. So do your best to use those materials: real objects, simulated objects, pictures, or drawings. Another thing that is and should be your best friend is the whiteboard or chalkboard. Even if you're teaching online, you can do a digital whiteboard. So it helps students a lot in the language classroom to be able to see what you're saying, especially if you're doing repeating something. So here you have bicycle. This is a black bicycle. This is a pink bicycle. If you have that written out on the board, students can see, they can see how to spell the word, they can associate the spelled word with the picture, and that is really, really helpful. A projector can do a similar thing, but it's, you can't quickly write on it or using it. But projectors and whiteboards are kind of the bread and butter. So I hope you have one. I hope you're able to use one in the classroom. They're really, really helpful. So utilize those for your students, and as much as possible, help them to see the sentence that you're saying, if that's the sentence you're teaching them, and to see pictures that go along with those vocabulary words. Another way of doing this is to print off things with icons or clip art embedded into that. So here's a song, and then you have kind of pictures going along with it. Again, if you can have real pictures, a real photo of the world, like from the space station or something, a picture of that would be awesome. But if you have to print in black and white, this is maybe the next best thing. So that can be really helpful as students are going. And I've seen this where each word has a picture, or almost every word has a picture. And that can be great, especially for lower level learners. So you can do that. You can print out these picture cards, and here you see a set of 3. You could do a set of 6 or whatever, but here's a set of 3. You got an apple and a banana and an ice cream. You cut those out, and each student gets a different one. So student A has the apple and banana and ice cream. Another student has pizza and orange and a cake. And then you can do some different activities. You could do walkabout matching, where students have to ask another student, do you have an apple? Yes, I do. Or no, I don't. So we might even get to practice some of these in the live training. Finally, another way you can use teaching materials is to have a set of pictures or cards with the pictures. Here's one with food, and then you have a separate set of ordering or matching or categorizing things. So here with food, you could say, as the teacher, you can say, on aisle 1 there are vegetables. Vegetables are on aisle 1, and then the students have to put that in. Or you could say, on aisle 2 there are apples. There are apples on aisle 2. There are bananas on aisle 2. In other words, like aisle 2 has fruit, and so on, and they have to categorize and move those pictures of items to different places. And you can categorize, many different things. You could do animals, you could do transportation, you could do the same kind of thing with other topics as well. Here's some other examples of teaching materials that will get you started. Again, picture files. I already talked about having a big file of pictures. If you can print them in color, and if you can print them big and even laminate them, that is ideal. If you can use make a set and then keep them at your ESL program, that would be awesome. If you can't and just do black and white, that works too. I like to have a smaller set as well for students to interact and kind of manipulate those picture files. Posters, charts, bulletin boards, all of those visuals can really help students. And then board games or playing cards. I have a number of different games. They're all in storage now, so I can't show you. I wish I could, but Apples to Apples can be good. That game. I have some games that have little figurines, and students use those. We don't even play the game. We just use the little figurines as a starting point for writing a sentence. So it just gives them, okay, here's a little teeny figurine of a dragon. Now I'm going to make a sentence with a dragon. Or here's a little figurine of a horse, and now I'm going to make a sentence, talking about this horse. Pocket charts, where you're putting words in the different pockets and building sentences. That's another great thing to do. That's what I use pocket charts for. You can use a flannel or magnet board to do the same thing, or to post up pictures on the wall. Using your projector, we already talked about, and even using your phone as a teaching material can be helpful. Or I've used my iPad in the past, but for your phone, if you're just one-on-one with students or with a small group of students, if you need to pop up a picture to help students understand, that's a great way to interact and help students to connect that word, that vocabulary word, with a picture. Let's do a couple reflection questions, and then we'll move on to the next part of our training. So number 1, which teaching material do you use most? and is it beneficial or is it best for my students? So think about, do I only use the whiteboard all the time? Maybe I could bring in some actual, photographs or some printed pictures. Or do I only use the projector? Maybe I could use other things as well. Maybe I can get some hands-on things, or maybe I could bring in some real objects. And that's kind of number 2, right? How can I include a new teaching material? What can I bring to the class that will engage students and help them really solidify their understanding? So for an example, I could bring junk mail or, my bills to class, and, I'll mark off all my credit card information on the bill or whatever. But I could bring that all to class, and students can sort it and decide what's junk and what's important. Or they could answer questions, a list of questions based on the different pieces of mail that I bring. That's very real world. A lot of my students have had trouble, and sometimes they even bring it to class and say, "Teacher, do I need this? Is this important?" And sometimes it's just junk mail. So that could be a good activity. Number 3, what's one way I can add a picture or some kind of teaching material to a lesson I already have? So think about ways that you can integrate and add new teaching material to help students to really solidify their understanding. So for an example, I could take pictures of buildings around my neighborhood where the ESL classes are, and then add these to the lesson about directions and map reading. So if I go around my neighborhood and take a picture of a fire station, the hospital, the gas station, then not only are they seeing like a random clip art or a random photo of a gas station, they're seeing a gas station that they walk by all the time, or they're seeing the fire station that is like our neighborhood fire station. That could really help students to connect, because maybe the picture that you get online is different from the one they see in our neighborhood. So that's another idea that you could use in your teaching materials. All right, well, I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in person for the live training. Take care.